Hey, what's going on, gang? Nate on the Stone here. Welcome back to my channel and to the 95th edition of the Rolling Stone. You will pardon the attire, just got off work, but we are not going to let that stop us. We are just going to roll on as we always do. This has been quite a week, as pretty much every week now is turning out to be. Lenin's old saying is actually coming true. Vladimir Lenin, of course, the first dictator of the Soviet Union, but as they say, even a broken clock is right twice every day. And one of the quotes from Lenin, I think I've quoted it here before, is that sometimes decades pass and nothing happens. Sometimes weeks pass and decades happen. That is the situation that we are actually in right now. So the first thing that we have to talk about is we have to talk about the current occupant of the White House finally gave an address to Congress. Joe Biden finally actually talked to Congress. First time in his presidency. It was actually even after the 100-day marker, because of course we passed that fateful event as well. Now, a couple of things just to say at the very beginning. So many people were saying that this was his State of the Union address, etc. It was not a State of the Union address. The State of the Union address happens in January. So even presidents who have just been inaugurated often give State of the Union addresses, which is more of their game plan for the first year. Yep, I'm taking over the helm of the executive branch. This is going to be my agenda. This is what I found when I've come in. So, this is what we're going to do. Biden didn't do that. There was no State of the Union address this year, which is the first time in a long time that that's happened. Don't know the exact number of years, but I know that it was revealing, as we shall say. But anyway, there was that. And then they said that this was going to be his first address to Congress. Well, even that was only half a truth, because honestly, Joe Biden was only talking to 200 people in the Senate, in the congressional chamber. He was only speaking to 200 sitting members of Congress. There are 535 sitting members of Congress, 435 in the House, 100 in the Senate. But there were only 200 because, of course, COVID restrictions and having to keep safety protocols, etc., etc., even though more and more people are getting fully vaccinated, but that's another story. We're not going to talk about his entire speech here. We're just not. But I wanted to point out one part of his speech, because this, I believe, illustrates exactly where we are at this moment as a society. And I think that it beautifully illustrates what the coming years are going to be. We are now living, I've said this before, gang, but I'm going to repeat this. We are now living in a totalitarian society. And this clip from Biden's speech before 200 sitting members of Congress proves it. Here's what he said.
The threat has evolved way beyond Afghanistan. Those of you in the intelligence committees, the foreign relations committee, defense committees, you know well, we have to remain vigilant against the threats to the United States wherever they come from. Al-Qaeda and ISIS are in Yemen, Syria, Somalia, other places in Africa, in the Middle East, and beyond. And we won't ignore what our intelligence agencies have determined to be the most lethal terrorist threat to the homeland today. White supremacy is terrorism. We're not going to ignore that either. My fellow Americans, look, we have to come together to heal the soul of this nation.
Now you might be thinking, okay, so white supremacy is terrorism. How does that prove that we are now a totalitarian society? Of course white supremacy is terrorism. I mean, look at what happened in Charlottesville back in 2017. The same incident that gave us the Very Fine People hoax. By the by, you can read about that again in the description box by Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, who really did a bang-up job in exposing that hoax, for all the good that it did, but, points for effort. What does this exactly prove? Well, it proves that we're in a totalitarian society because of what white supremacy now all includes. You might be thinking of white supremacy as the American Nazi Party. You might be thinking it of the KKK. You might be thinking David Duke. You might be thinking of, all these skinheads and white-robed people who actively preach the inherent and moral objective superiority of the European races over Asian races, people from Africa, etc., etc. But that is not what white supremacy now means. Thanks to our old friend critical race theory gang, white supremacy can be found not just in your local chapter of the KKK with the, what do they call them, the octogenarian Klansmen who still think that it's, 1963 or something? No. We have expanded the definition. So, here is partly what is included now in white supremacy. Characteristics of white supremacy. For example, perfectionism, sense of urgency, defensiveness, quantity over quality, worship of the written word, only one right way, paternalism, either or thinking, power hoarding, fear of open conflict, individualism, I'm the only one, progress is bigger, objectivity, right to comfort. Those are now characteristics of white supremacy. Now, really look, really think about what this means, okay? Objectivity, let's just take that one. Objectivity. If you believe that there is such a thing as objective reality, that the world, that the laws of reality, the laws of the physical universe, the laws of nature, as it were, they are what they are. And it is our job to find out what they are and then to obey them. Because if we do not obey them and follow them, then severe consequences are going to happen upon us and upon others. Okay? That's objectivity. I mean, that's one of the most basic elements of objectivity. It means that reality is not subjective. Reality is not what I wish it to be. Reality is simply what it is. So, for example, saying that there are only two sexes, men and women. Those are the only sexes that there are. That's an example of objectivity. That is now an example of white supremacy. That is a sign of white supremacy. It's an indicator that you are actually a white supremacist. What about punctuality? Being on time. Well, that now is also a sign of white supremacy because, as we've all been told now, thanks to critical race theory, people from different cultures and different backgrounds, they have different concepts of time. So when you say, hey, let's meet at noon, well, in their culture, noon might mean something different. Or in their culture, putting people at ease is more important, and so they will arrive either really early or really late, or whatever reason. Okay, I'm just spewing off the top of my head here at the moment. But punctuality simply means that you respect your time, you respect other people's time, because you recognize that time is a finite resource for all of us. Because no matter how you or your culture or your native nationality or your background, family, whatever, no matter how they subjectively view time, the important objective fact of the case is that we all only have a certain amount of it, because we have a point in time when we're born and we have a point in time when we die. And as Seneca, the Roman philosopher and writer, said in one of his letters, every day that passes by moves us further and further away from this first point, the point when we were born, and closer and closer and closer to this point, the point when we die. So time is finite. But now, asking people to be punctual, to respect your time, to respect their time, that is white supremacy. Perfectionism, you want to do your best, white supremacy. Fear of open conflict, you want people to actually get along, to compromise, that is now white supremacy. Either or thinking, which again, either or thinking that sometimes is false, yes, because there is such a thing as a false dichotomy. It is a logical fallacy when you say, okay, it's either this or it's that, and you miss the 1, 2, 3, or however many other options that you have. But sometimes it is either or thinking. Sometimes it is either or thinking. This is either right or it is wrong. So for example, abortion. Let's just take an obvious moral issue of the day. Abortion. It is either right or it is wrong. There is no middle ground. Not with that one. That is now another sign of white supremacy. So, what this means is that the idea of white supremacy, because it's been expanded so much, now it incorporates more and more people. You, and here's the beauty of it, gang, you could have been born in 1990, you might be, progressive in some areas of life, you might have a myriad of friends, not because you were actually harvesting friends of different colors so that you could add them to your collection like Pokemon cards, but because you honestly just liked these people. They were fun to be around. They liked you, you liked them, you hit it off, etc., etc. So you just became friends. Okay? Doesn't matter. If you are a perfectionist, if you actually maintain some idea of objective reality, you are now a white supremacist. Or you are on that borderline, well, maybe you might be a white supremacist. And that is important because now, the current occupant of the White House has equated white supremacy with terrorism, meaning that if you believe in objective reality, then you might have to be put on a terrorist watch list. Because that's how bad it is. White supremacy equals terrorism. White supremacy now equals belief in objective reality, either or thinking, worshiping the written word. That's interesting too. So for example, in our culture, respecting the rule of law. Our laws are written down. The Declaration of Independence, a written document. The Constitution, a written document. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787, a written document. The Emancipation Proclamation, a written document. Supreme Court cases, written documents. Interesting also to think of. So this is how it's going to work. Because, of course, this was the entire plan. This is actually the end game. To expand the idea of white supremacy to such an extent that anyone could fall under that category. And in so doing, making anyone a possible terrorist. And that's actually useful for a couple of reasons. First, it sows the ground for the coming political persecutions. Get ready for them. And it also keeps the rest of society in a state of perpetual fear. It's another way of maintaining perpetual war, which Orwell talks about in 1984. Brilliant book. And a brilliant explanation that the state always needs an enemy, an internal enemy. Because if you always have perpetual enemies that pose an existential threat to the society, then it I'm trying to think of the right word here, gang. It justifies. It justifies the powers that be. It justifies the state. It justifies the bureaucracy, the elite, whatever you want to call it. It justifies them in everything that they do because they can always claim, well, we're doing this so that the enemies won't destroy everything that we've built. Those terrorists won't blow us all to kingdom come. That's what they're doing. Because people who are in a perpetual state of fear are easier to control. They're either afraid or they want to again show off what good little people they are, what good little minions they are, and so they obey. No matter what the government, or the state, I should say, says, they will obey. Now that's one way that Biden's speech show that we're not on the road to totalitarianism. We're here. It's here, baby. American totalitarianism is here. Welcome to 2021. Happy New Year and Merry Christmas all rolled into one. But there was something else as well that I just had to show because this is icing on the cake here. The major media outlets reported after Biden's address to 200 sitting members of Congress that 85% of Americans approved of his speech. They loved it. They loved what Biden said. They loved his vision of the country. They loved everything. Well, guess what? Turns out that that's actually false. I'm reading this story not from some right-wing rabbit site, but from Snopes.com, which is not a right-wing site by any stretch of the imagination. The claim is that 85% of Americans approved of U.S. President Joe Biden's first speech before a joint session of Congress. Context: this stat refers to the approval rating among Americans who watched the speech, not the country as a whole. While the 85% of viewers did approve of the speech, get ready for this, gang, according to CBS News, the majority of those views were Democrats. We don't know. This is from the actual story. Quote, "We don't know what percentage of Americans approved of Biden's speech yet, but it likely wasn't 85%. This stat comes from a report by CBS News, who reported that 85% of viewers, not Americans, approved of the speech. As the audience of Biden's speech last night likely skewed to the left, this statistic does not represent all Americans. CBS News reported that 54% of people who watched the speech were Democrats, 25% were independents, and 18% were Republicans. Of those people, 85% approved of the speech." So it was a massively skewed poll right from the get-go. And yet the major news media outlets still reported that 85% of Americans approved of Biden's speech. Now that is interesting in and of itself because it definitely has a Beijing, Pyongyang, which is the capital, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, of North Korea. It definitely has a North Korean, Chinese, Iranian, totalitarian bent to it. That, of course, the vast majority of people approved of what the leader said because, of course, 85% of the people loved the leader. They love the leader. It's only those pesky 15%, the racists and traitors in our midst that have to be done away with. Wink, wink, hint, hint. There's that. But it also functions as a psychological weapon as well. Because if you're someone, okay, just a normal run-of-the-mill guy who doesn't particularly care for Biden, because it seems like from under him now, biological sex seems to be being erased. Now he's talking about expanding the Supreme Court. Gas prices are rising. There seems to be more and more shortages of things. There's a wood shortage now. You're still not finding things on the grocery, even though the vaccine is rolling out, and even though people are giving Biden all the credit, saying, for example, Operation Warp Speed, which was the cooperation between the federal government and different private companies to get a COVID vaccine out as quickly as possible. Even though Operation Warp Speed happened under President Trump, people are now just openly saying that Operation Warp Speed was Biden's idea. Even when it was conceived and implemented, he wasn't anywhere near any level of lever of government or power. He was just a private citizen at that point. So all of these things are churning around and around and around in your head. What I was going to say is, even though the vaccine is being rolled out and more Americans are being vaccinated, Biden and everyone else, like Dr. Fauci and other people, are still saying, no, even if you're completely and totally vaccinated, you still have to maintain social distancing. You still have to wear a mask when you go out. Shouldn't leave the home, if you don't have to. If there's any way that you don't have to leave the house, you shouldn't, etc., etc. So you're starting to wonder, well, then when is normal going to come back? And that date, too, keeps getting pushed back. I think in November, Biden said that he hoped things would get back to normal in March or April. And then in January he said, well, by the 4th of July. And then last month in March he said, well, definitely by Christmas time, everything will be back to normal. So all these things are rolling around in your mind. And your idea of Biden, and plus all the gaffes and falling up the stairs, I should say, and you're starting to wonder, things don't seem to be good. But then you read this: 85% of Americans approve of him. 85% of Americans approved of what he had to say. And then, when that vast of a number is laid before you, and it is repeated again and again and again and again on the news media, on social media, in the newspapers, on the radio, everywhere you turn, 85% approve, 85% approve, 85% approve, you start to wonder, am I the problem? Am I the guy, who's somehow asleep at the wheel? Am I not seeing things how they actually are? That is how this thing works. It is to isolate people, to make you think that you are all alone, that you are an island unto yourself, that you're the kook, you're the weirdo, you're the guy with, 7 fingers on each hand and a third eye growing out of your forehead. So you will stay quiet. Because, you don't want to actually reveal that you have questions about Biden in a room full of Biden supporters, and they're everywhere. The vast majority of the country loves and adores him, apparently. And because also, it'll probably just be another sign of white supremacy. That is how American totalitarianism is working in 2021. The same methods as in Soviet Russia, Fidel Castro's Cuba, North Korea, China. We've joined that happy throng. That is story number 1.